But it took me breaking my arm, I think, to know that I wasn't going to be a concert pianist. And then discovering this other thing, and that led me, I don't know, it's just by luck really that I became a composer. It wasn't really on my radar too much.
Yeah, it's interesting because you became a composer, multi-instrumentalist, luthier, improviser. I'm guessing you're maybe happier now than you would have been had you been successful following your original dream.
I think about that all the time. And I think, yes, definitely.
Hi, you're listening to Conversations with Musicians with Leah Roseman, which I hope inspires you through the personal stories of a fascinating diversity of musical guests. Jesse Jones is an internationally renowned composer, winner of both the Guggenheim and Rome Prizes. I discovered another side to his music with the bluegrass-fusion group Ezra, and we start the episode with that wonderful collaboration. We're also highlighting Jacob Jolliff's album of Jesse's music, including his recent mandolin concerto. You'll hear about how Jesse started building instruments and how he expresses his love of bluegrass and folk traditions in his complex classical music. He's received commissions from many leading ensembles and soloists, and he's currently a professor of composition at Oberlin Convervatory. You'll also hear some of Xak Bjerken's performance of Variations on Oklahoma Rooster, which was commissioned as a companion piece to Brahms Variations and Fugue on a theme by Handel. Jesse also spoke about his love for microtonality in a refreshingly personal way, and I was really moved to hear how his path in music changed completely and surprisingly after an accident. You can watch the video on my YouTube or listen to the podcast, and I've also linked the transcript. Have a look at the show notes of this episode on my website, where you'll find all the links. Hey, Jesse, thanks so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
When we were trying to connect a few weeks ago about finding a time, you were building a cabin. It might be interesting to start there. How about that project?
Yeah, this will be relevant, actually. It was just a little bit about my past. I was raised by older parents who were both raised sort of after the Depression. My dad was born, I think, in 1930. And was very much a work every day, make a living, and be a good and honorable man that way. And so I grew up doing a lot of things like carpentry and woodworking projects and farm work and tractor work and things like that. So there's definitely that side of me. And since at this point in my life, both of my parents are passed, I find myself revisiting sort of the elements in me that are like them. And I've started to look towards things like carpentry and timber framing, and as my dad's side and his influence on who I am as a person. So, yeah, my wife and I acquired some land 3 or 4 years ago now, and I just decided to buy some rough lumber and try my hand at some timber framing. So I've got a cabin up and working on a barn. Just eventually to sort of live there someday. We're not gonna move in anytime soon or anything, but it's just it's a way to connect to my roots, I guess, in a way, which is what I'm always trying to do, both physically in my life, but also artistically in my musical life as well. So
Yeah. And you were off grid. You had no phone
yeah,
or...
yeah. I mean, I got a generator, so I could use things like hand saws and drills and things, but mostly it's just no electricity, no internet. Like I can't even send out a text or anything. I have a phone specifically for travel. It's the only phone I have, really. So I take it to the land, but it's useless because there's no signal.
Did you consider getting like a satellite phone for emergencies for that sort of situation?
I'm not even aware of what that is.
Okay.
So no.
Well, I discovered your music through Ezra Quartet, and actually it was the Froggy's Demise album.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just, what is this? And I was just like listening to it a lot. So I actually had reached out, I think last year when that came out.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually wanted to start with that project.
Sure.
I was listening again, this morning, and it shows off all the collaborators so well. I was just listening to McLaughlin a few minutes ago,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly Craig's bass playing is really virtuosic in that. And
Amazing.
like many of the pieces on this album, you start listening, it's like, oh, it's bluegrass, it's jazz, but it's actually, a lot of them are through composed. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
have room for improv, but this one, McLaughlin, it's through composed, right?
I think so. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think there's room for anybody improvising solos in this. It's arranged from top to bottom. Yeah.
And is it your composition or was that collaborative?
The outside bits are mine, and then there's a part that Craig wrote where he's just shredding on the bass in the middle. That tune that comes in the middle is Craig's tune, and
Mm.
then but we arranged the piece as a band. So it's my music is in the outer parts, and then Craig's tune, but all arranged by all of us.
So you had met all the members of this band and other people, we'll get into it at different times, but this was kind of a pandemic project in terms of making the first recording, right?
Ezra as a project kind of was, yeah. I mean, it was a little bit after the pandemic, but yeah. So especially during the pandemic, I've always been sort of what I would call like a classical musician. I was raised, playing piano and doing piano competitions, and that was my main focus for a long time. And I found bluegrass through Alison Krauss, like in the 90s, after I had broken my arm, which meant that I couldn't really practice the piano at that time. And my sister had like a guitar laying around, and I learned how to play some chords, and it was my first exposure really to anything other than classical music, like Chopin and Liszt and Brahms. And I just really, really fell in love, especially with the sound of the mandolin. And ever since breaking my arm and discovering guitar and mandolin and this new style of music, I sort of just fell headlong for it and started practicing that as rigorously as I had practiced the piano. Um, and I was so enamored with all of it that I couldn't really stick with any one instrument for too long. I've kind of played them all my whole life, and the result of this is that over 20 years since picking the instrument up for the first time, I have written just a host of tunes. And those are all just kind of sitting in my head and in my fingers um, for decades. And the only people that know them are my kids who have heard me play them in my living room their whole lives, my wife, and me. Um, and there just came a point where I had all these tunes and I realized that I just had to get them out there. I'm naturally kind of a reclusive person. I have a hard time putting myself out there for performances and things. But I just have this sort of vast output of what I would call fiddle tunes. And as I was meeting these great musicians throughout my life, I just said, yeah, someday maybe I'll arrange all these tunes and put a band together. And then during the pandemic, I was writing more and more tunes. And then just after the pandemic, I came back in contact with a mandolin player named Jacob Jolliff, who I had known 20 years earlier as a little kid. Um, and we got to be friends again and reconnected. And there also happened to be a student here at Oberlin in my department who was just a world-class banjo player, Max Allard. Uh, and then I'd been sort of playing with a bassist, Craig Butterfield, for the previous years, a little bit, arranging tunes of mine and doing tunes of his. And so I just decided, stop just playing these in your living room. Let's get all these people together and make an album. And that was about 3.5 years ago. Um, and the initial recording was 9 tunes of mine that we just got together and put together, I think, in like a 5-day period. And then the next project was something completely different with like instrument inventor, and I had built instruments myself. And then Froggy's Demise, which you mentioned, is our third album. Um, but we had only been together maybe a year and a half or something when we released Froggy's Demise, which is our third album already. So it's just we had so many tunes that we had the ability to just put together all these albums in such a short time. So that's kind of the story of how Ezra came to be. It was through being isolated during the pandemic, probably, that gave me the impetus to want to play with other people. And then just the rest is history, as they say, and that we're constantly trying to find projects to do together now. And I think I'm about done with all the old tunes I've written, but I'm always constantly writing new ones. So hopefully this will keep going into the future.
Yeah. Well, later in this episode, we'll get more into your life as a classical composer and academic, which is huge. But if we could just stick with Ezra for a while.
Yeah.
So back to Froggy's Demise album. So I love the whole album. I've listened to it many times. I'll mention a couple of tunes and maybe we'll include some clips. And I encourage people to go and listen and maybe buy the album. So Sobreandando is named for a Peruvian horse gait. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like the rhythm of it.
Yeah, that's a tune. That's a tune written by our banjo player Max.
Okay. It's got this sort of gait to it. It was always a little ambiguous and vague. We're like, what do you mean? And he'd play it for us and we would just try to mimic it as much as we could. But he had this very particular rhythmic feel on the banjo, and there was also a little bit of like tapping the head or scuffing the head of the banjo too, which was just kind of unique. Yeah, and definitely we had never done a tune in that feel before, so that's where that came. Okay. You'd have to ask him more of the details about the rhythm, though. Yeah, okay. You had mentioned that Max was in your department, so was he a composition student at the time?
Yeah, he had come in exactly around the time when I got in touch with Jake again, after a 20-year sort of hiatus when he was growing from a young boy into the virtuoso he is today. Max came into our studio as a composition student and studied with me for 4 years. And he's such a good banjo player and such just natural musician and intellect as well. I just tried to do as many projects while he was here as I could. And he's definitely grown since then in the last 5 years into just, I think, a world-class player.
Yeah. So you play some banjo as well?
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah. Like I said, I play a lot of instruments okay, and maybe only a couple pretty well. So.
Well, you play quite a bit of guitar, but do you play fiddle actually?
I have fiddled in the past, never very seriously. Yeah, only fiddle. Although I did play the the Gigue from the D minor partita.
Okay.
Of Bach. Not very well, but I did learn that on violin. But mostly just fiddle tunes. I've done some fiddle contests sort of at the intermediate level.
Okay.
I need frets.
Well, I'm a violinist, and
right.
I tried mandolin, and I thought, I'm sure if I actually worked at it, I could get it, but it felt so different. I thought it would feel familiar, but it really didn't at all.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not the first violinist to say that they've tried the mandolin, and like you, I would think it'd just be like a natural go over, but it is slightly larger, and knowing how to fit it, like the pressure is a lot more,
Yeah.
and it's really the right hand that is the tricky thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So Jake Jolliff, amazing mandolin player.
yeah.
Great, great
Oh, I
musician.
mean, without exaggeration, I'd say he's probably one of the top five players in the world,
Yeah.
and not just in like bluegrass, but he's an incredible jazz player. Just one of the best musicians I've ever known, and I'm really lucky to have become, friends with him again. Um, and he's actually become a large part of my most recent output, I'd say, in the last 4 years.
Yeah. So his album actually, it's like Jolliff Plays Jones, so it's the
Hmm.
concerto. I thought we could get into that actually.
You bet.
Do you think he'd be okay with including a couple clips from that?
I'm sure he would. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, the opening, which is the prelude, I really
Hmm.
love that actually.
Thank you.
Violinists play that, or is it really mandolin
Yeah.
specific?
Actually, I wrote it on the octave mandolin, which is just like an octave lower
Hmm.
than the mandolin. And then I got a commission for a solo viola piece. And this was during the pandemic. And so I sort of morphed that into a very Bariolagi viola piece. You can actually find it on YouTube, the
Yeah.
viola version. And I actually think it's really effective, and I'm sure that could go over into the violin. I'll send it to you, and you can tell me
Yeah,
if
for
it's
sure.
possible.
Well, fifth over would be good.
Yeah.
Okay. So this concerto, it's in
Hmm.
five movements,
Hmm.
and actually the finale, well, it's all great, but I really love the finale, so I thought we could include a little bit of that. Do you want to say a little bit about this concerto and the process?
I guess I haven't talked much about sort of my life as a classical musician beyond, just growing up as a pianist.
Mm.
Um, but when I broke my arm as a teenager and I kind of left the piano for a little while, I cast about for some years, wondering what my musical life would look like. I was a music education major for a little while. I looked seriously at conducting, for instance, as a degree, and then I finally found composition, and I was like, oh, I could write music, sure. And so those are the degrees I got, um, undergrad, master's, and PhD. Um, but that was a very different. That was definitely in the classical music trajectory, which I love. But I was always trying to like reinvent the wheel harmonically all the time as a modern composer, right? I couldn't just write like Brahms or something. I had to like come up with a voice and a language that was like unique to me while still paying tribute to all the great masters, etc. But by that time, I also really in love with what I would call just like the fiddle tradition and fiddle tunes, and that's what I was mostly writing, was fiddle tunes. And my whole like 20-year career has been sort of like trying to synthesize what I know as a classical musician, both in terms of counterpoint, harmony, chromaticism, um, with just the bare the bare essence of what I love about folk music and fiddle tunes. And that has proven to be a very difficult synthesis to make, because it seems like when you try to superimpose a fiddle tune in sort of classical trappings, then it diminishes one or the other. Or if you try to turn a classical band like a string quartet into a bluegrass band, it somehow diminishes one or the other. And so my whole career has been trying to find a language that really does combine those two elements. And I would say probably since 2018 is when I've finally felt like I've started to find that language. Mm-hmm. And this is just a very long-winded way of coming around to why the mandolin concerto is like it is. Mm-hmm. So during this time, I'm writing fiddle tunes galore in my living room. They're just in my hands. Some of them became Ezra tunes, some as duos with Craig Butterfield. But when I started to develop this language of this synthesis between classical composition, modern harmonic techniques, but also like the fiddle tune elements, I basically started to become what I describe as sort of my version of a Bartók, who definitely did the same thing, knew all about all the modern techniques in composition, but really assimilated all this folk music from his region in this way that just makes this music that was Bartók. I mean, that's his language. And I'd like to think that the American sort of fiddle tradition music or roots music, plus what I know about modern contemporary composition, have synthesized to the point where I sound like me, just like Bartók sound like Bartók. And so in the mandolin concerto, really why it's called tune book is because it's just 5 of those fiddle tunes that have been in my hands for decades. And actually, one of them, I think it's in the second movement, I actually taught the fiddle tune to Jacob Jolliff back when he was like 12. Like as a fiddle tune. So I knew that I had to return to that one specifically. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers any specific questions about it, but it's the most recent thing I've composed that is engaging both like the contemporary classical tradition and also this sort of fiddle tune element in a way that I'm really happy to explore. I'm really lucky to have Jake. He's such a world-class virtuoso to do it, because it's a knuckle buster, as they say.
Yeah. And is that the university orchestra?
Yeah, well, it's actually just a group of students. It's a small ensemble, maybe 14 players or something. Mm-hmm. Just 2 violins, 2 violas, 2 cellos, and bass for the strings, and then 3 flutes, 3 flutes and 3 clarinets, 2 percussion, and mandolin. And yeah, they gave the premiere here. And then I just went to everybody and said, like, hey, let's make a recording of this while it's fresh and good. So we did a project here, brought Jake in and recorded it here at Oberlin.
Oh, that's great. I want to talk about Whippersnap, but maybe we should talk about your Lutherie first.
Oh, okay, sure.
Because it's so interesting to me that you managed to fit all this in to your creative life. I'm curious how you got started and what that looks like now.
I guess it goes back to what I said earlier when we were talking about cabin building, timber framing. It's just like it's my dad's influence, I think. The building aspect is my dad's influence. But I just remember from being a very little kid, my sister had a cello that I was not allowed to touch, and it was there in the corner. And she never touched it either, but it was her cello. And it was sitting there, and I just remember like just being in total disbelief. I'd go there and stare at it, that this could be made out of a tree, right? And I just couldn't, and I just wanted so badly to go and like make a sound with it and explore the whole thing when I was a very little kid, like 5 years old or seven or something. And I've always been intrigued with how instruments are made. Um, and I was actually as interested in that as I was in the music that was being made. And when I learned about people like Stradivari and Guarneri and just how they made these instruments, and I realized that there was no way for Yo-Yo Ma, right, playing from Tanglewood, when those old broadcasts they did from Tanglewood back in the 80s and 90s. It used to be on PBS. I'd watch that and I'd be amazed by the music, but I'd also be amazed that someone made that instrument, and I knew that the music would not be possible without that person. But that person was never talked about, right? But had so much to do with the sound that was coming out and like being defined by this great artist. And so it's always been something I've been really interested in. Whenever I see an instrument, I want to count the grain lines because I want to know how old the tree was. And if the instrument was built in the 1850, then there's that, that means it's probably from the 1700s. And that just has always fascinated me. And then as a player, eventually I realized that I was never going to be able to afford any of the instruments that I would want to play or sound like I wanted. So I better start building my own because it was much cheaper to build them myself. And that's another pandemic project where I just found myself with so much time, and that's just something I've always wanted to do and have been interested in. So I started. I got a guitar kit and I put that together. And I just saw how it went together. And I was like, oh, I could do this just from raw materials. So I started to do that more and more. Yeah, and I guess it's been sort of 6 years that I've been building seriously now, making most of my own instruments that I play on any of the recordings I'm on. Like definitely all of Ezra is mostly played on all instruments I built. I've made an instrument now for Jacob Jolliff. I built him an octave mandolin that he's playing. And I guess I've started to become known a little bit. I mean, a little bit, because I'm getting commissions from people to build instruments across the spectrum, from the mandolin world to the guitars, but also the bowed world. I'm building a 5-string viola, a viola d'amore, a viola da gamba right now. So yeah, sorry, I tend to ramble on without direction, but that's sort of my story of Lutherie, and I love it as much as I love music. It's what I find myself doing at least half of the time.
I mean, the fact that Jake is playing your octave mandolin, I've seen him post about it on social media. I mean, he's not just saying that because he's your friend. Like, he obviously loves the instrument, right?
I hope not. Yeah, that is really like a dream come true. I remember, as a musician, I'm sure you're familiar with this. Like, you make sort of goals for your progress, maybe, of like, oh man, by next year, I want to have done this. I want to have played this piece, or I want to like really get this technique down. And I think some of my goalposts for Lutherie or instrument building have been to get my instruments in the hands of real deal players. And I've done that a few times. And Jake is probably the the pinnacle of like well-known players that I've gotten my instruments in the hands of. And I'm constantly working towards that thing. But to hear him play that and to know that he likes it, and I do feel that he is sincere when he says that, that's really special for me.
I know violin makers source their wood from Italy because they're China. It's true. But I assume you're using American wood?
I use, it depends on the instrument or the instrument family, of course, but I do source wood actually from a place in Italy.
Okay.
For the bowed world stuff
Yeah.
that I make. There are a number of smaller There are some luthier supply places like Stuart McDonald that everyone goes to for tools. But I like to actually mill my own wood if I possibly can from logs that I collect. A maple tree just came down in our neighbor's yard, and I went over there and sheepishly asked if do you have anything for the trunk part, right? Or do you have any purpose for it, or could I have it? And so there's this huge maple trunk sitting in my backyard now because eventually I will mill that up and that'll turn into mandolin or violin backs or something. So that's how I really like to do it. And I know that there are a number of shops around, or small run mills around. Like there's one in Oregon that I go to quite often. That they do that process with domestic woods. So I like getting wood when I can from folks like that.
Mm-hmm. Have you dabbled in bow making at all?
I haven't. I think if I could actually play the violin very well, I might be more interested. But it's not something
Yeah.
I touch on a regular basis or even pretend to understand that well. So no, I haven't. I know that's where the money is, though.
Yeah, actually. So the guitar that you mostly play, the guitar players listening will be interested to know what that is that you made.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, it changes, I think, from album to album.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm pretty sure that on Froggy's Demise, I play a classical guitar that I built. It's basically a Hauser model, and I play a shape or a mold of a L0, like a Gibson L0. Was the guitar I played on there.
Okay. Yeah, before we leave, actually, Froggy's Demise, there were a couple of tunes I wanted to highlight. Maybe we'll get to.
Sure.
Just for contrast, Golden Hill.
Mm-hmm. Golden Hill, yeah, that's me on banjo, and Craig on bass, and that's the only duo on the album. And we actually wrote that at Tanglewood.
Oh.
Where I was there for a performance of a piece, and they put me up in this amazing place that was overlooking the lake there. I think they call it the Punch Bowl. And we just sat there and we'd like cook steaks on the grill at night, and we just wrote this piece while we're there, and it was Golden Hill Road. So that's why the tune is called Golden Hill. But I love playing the banjo. I think it's got this reputation of being sort of loud and brash, but I think it's such a sweet sounding instrument, and so I don't know, crystalline or something. There's something about the tone that's very complex but pure at the same time, just in the right balance. And so this tune is just this sort of floating atmosphere that's banjo and bass, and I think it's only pizzicato bass, and it's just a very particular plucked sound world that I'm very fond of.
And you built that banjo that you're playing?
I did not. I've never built a banjo.
Okay.
That would be cool though someday.
Yeah. A few years ago on the series, I had Adam Hurt, and we talked about gourd banjos, and he demonstrated different banjos, and yeah, that was a very cool episode because he played a lot. I can link that.
Man, yeah, that's a vast world.
Yeah.
There's so many different types of banjos, and of course, so much of its history is, obscure, and luckily coming to light more and more. Just where it comes from, like how many people, the sort of appropriations of modern culture of the banjo. So, yeah, it's an amazing instrument.
Yeah. Well, the your most recent album is Whippersnap, and
Hmm.
it has your friend pianist Xak Bjerken,
Hmm.
who's also recorded some of your classical compositions.
Yeah, he's probably my MVP. Like, he Zach's a very special person. He's also a very dear friend. But our relationship started as, and I will always kind of think of him first and foremost as a mentor, because when I got to Cornell as a graduate student, he teaches piano there, and me trying to just you know develop my skills while I was in school, I actually signed up for piano lessons with Zach, and I had to go in and audition and hope I was like good enough to get into his studio because he's the professor. Um, and I was, and I studied with him for about 3 years, and he was immensely helpful for me to like get me to just kind of relax in my technique. We had children who were the same age as each other, and we would get together so that they could play. And Zach and I became fast friends pretty quick, and my family and his family became fast friends. And he started, commissioning pieces from me. Um, so I think it's probably upwards of 10 pieces now that he's commissioned and premiered, and I love working with him because he's such a thoughtful and sensitive musician, and he just really, more than anyone I've worked with, honestly, he's so meticulous about how the piece should be interpreted, and he's very thoughtful about that. And it's sort of like a dream come true as a composer because you make this thing like sort of alone with your instrument and your composition chops, and you put it out there into the world, and then a really great musician like Zach will come in and he'll turn it into something beyond what you had envisioned. Like he'll take what you did and turn it into something that's greater than your initial vision. And he's done that with every single piece. Just a couple months ago, I wrote my third piano concerto for him with wind ensemble. We went up to the Eastman School of Music to premiere it, and it's so hard. And he's so thoughtful of every phrase and how it should be interpreted, and just has just a great attitude. And so for Whippersnap, we're always looking for something to add that's not quite just our bluegrass band. Like our second album, we used this like instrument inventor, the great Mark Stewart from Paul Simon's band and Bang on a Can. And so then we did Froggy's Demise, which was basically just our core members. And then for Whippersnap, we were like, let's get a piano in there. Let's see what happens there. And so my first thought was Zach. And even though Zach, I guess if you listen to the album, it might sound a little jazzier in its aesthetic. And Zach is not a jazz pianist, but our whole project is about just throwing ourselves into these situations that maybe not everyone's comfortable with. So, and Zach just, of course, rose right because he's such a great musician, rose to the occasion and wrote his own solos and everything. So that was a real pleasure to have Zach on board for that project.
And I was curious in terms of pieces you've written for him. When people commission you in general, do they give you any guidance or their ideas, or is it just please write me a piece that's 10 minutes long?
Yeah, well, it depends on the person and what it's for, but Zach is usually like, just, yeah, write me a piece and make it whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
Um, I think he did the only thing he'd say, like with the concerto, for instance, he would say like, yeah, probably under 20 minutes would be good, but like just write what you want to write. Um, and he would say stuff like, I really love, you know, your fun, lighthearted, sort of Ezra-like voice, or like the mandolin concerto, for instance. So I'd really love that, but of course, write whatever. Um, so I took those into account, but he's never been one to say like, I really need a piece that's for microtonal piano in 5 minutes. You know, like never. Some people though do really want that. There's a piece that I wrote for Xak back in 2018, I think, which is a huge set of variations called Variations on Oklahoma Rooster, which is a 26-minute piece, and it was meant to be a companion piece to the Brahms Handel Variations. And he was going to do a concert where he'd put those back and forth, and so I did have to respond. You know, like the Brahms, it's a seminal work. It's one of the great sets of variations ever written, in my opinion. So I had to make a piece that sort of stood next to Brahms. So that was a challenge. So that was like a specific commission idea where I was a little more constrained, but I actually like constraints. They help me focus through and get through a piece. So the Oklahoma Rooster is probably one of my favorite of my works. I kind of consider it my magnum opus at this
Okay.
point.
And what I'll do is I will link the YouTube file for people in the show notes so they can go hear the whole thing.
Awesome. I'm very proud of that piece. I would appreciate that.
Actually, I really enjoyed the piece you wrote for the Beethoven project, that scherzo for violin and
Oh,
piano.
thanks. I've done this with Bach as well. This seems to be a big commission. When people commission you, it's often with a project in mind. Like I have a violin concerto that I wrote back in 2009 or something for the violinist Joseph Lynn, who teaches at Juilliard. And he was going to play all of the Bach sonatas and partitas solo. And then he wanted that many composers, however many suites there were, or sonatas and partitas. He wanted a composer to write like a companion piece that was based on that. And I was lucky enough to get the E major and that famous Prelude. And so, I wrote a piece that was in response to Bach and used some Bach. And then another one was this Beethoven project that you've mentioned, where it's just like you respond with your compositional voice to Beethoven. And so I just said like, okay, Beethoven is just like fire and virtuoso and counterpoint and great harmonic shifts, right? And so that's what I went with. I used a little motto from one of his sonatas and just went with it. And then this Brahms project was another one that I wrote for Xak. So that seems to be pretty ripe territory these days, where it's like if you have a composer you love and then you have modern pieces written in response to those pieces, I think it makes for a nice collaboration.
Yeah, and it's a good in for the audience too, because they
Yeah,
hear something they
exactly.
know well. Yeah.
Yeah, and even just on a tune level, if you're going to incorporate a tune or some aspect of a piece, it's really good. Yeah.
Actually, on Whippersnap, you have this tune, My Point Exactly, that gets quite Bach-like.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's a tune that Jake wrote.
Okay.
Jake Jolliff wrote, and he was trying to write something that was sort of classically based, and then Xak wrote a counterpoint to it. So it's like that's just Jake's punny title, like it's counterpoint written by Xak. My
Yeah.
point exactly. So
Hi, just a really quick break to let you know that I've linked a few suggested episodes in the show notes for you. With banjo player Adam Hurt, mandolinist Joe K. Walsh, instrument innovator and improviser, creator of the Bazantar, the late Mark Deutsch, Irish composer Karen Power, who uses nature recordings from some of the most remote places on Earth, Jesse Stewart, the Canadian composer, percussionist, visual artist, researcher, and educator, and composer and pianist Michael Stephen Brown, among so many episodes since 2021. Sign up for my newsletter, where you'll get exclusive information about upcoming guests. Consider buying me a coffee on my Ko-fi page, or buying some unique podcast merch. You can also review this podcast, share it with your friends, and follow on your podcast app, YouTube, and social media. All this helps spread the word. Thanks. Now, back to Jesse. So back to Whippersnap, that opening track, Milk on Tap, really great.
yeah. Oh, it's so fun. And yeah, Max Allard, that's a tune by him.
Okay.
And I think, you know, he was a student here, and at the dining hall, I think they just literally had milk in a spigot that I think he would sneak in and get in odd hours and stuff. So that's where the title comes from. But that's really like a piece that is a good depiction of what a great musician Max is, because he's a banjo player, and I think when people initially think, oh, a banjo player, they think like loud and rowdy bluegrass, which is a great thing, and of course Max can do, but there's such a more sensitive side and a very melodic side to banjo. And in his hands, like the tunes that come out of his hands and out of his mind are just very lyrical and beautiful and harmonically rich. And I think beautiful rather than always like driving and brash, which I think is what everyone thinks of when they think of the banjo. There's those funny, you know, Far Side things where the maestro is being led into a room full of banjo players, and that's like his personal hell. But I really love the banjo, especially in the hands of Max, because it's so sensitively done. He's, I think, just got a really bright future.
Well, there's also the tune Gossamer, which is so meditative. It's a nice contrast. Did you think putting together the album, because I'm sure you recorded more than an album's worth, like we want to have some balance, or just pick your favorites?
I think because the guys in my band are like really world-class virtuosos, I think we tend to make things really difficult. Just they tend to be really notey and fast-paced and, you know, kind of heady. And I love that very much. But sometimes I think it's nice for an album full of tons and tons of notes and harmonic changes for there to be something that's a little bit more contemplative. That's a tune that sort of just fell out of a new instrument I had made, a classical guitar. And that seems to be the case, that whenever a new instrument comes to life, I just find myself writing a tune on it pretty naturally, like within the first couple hours of its life, the first time it's strung up. It just kind of wants to make a certain sound. And so this guitar that I built just had this very beautiful quality on a particular string, and that melody came out, and I harmonized it, and we again came up with the arrangement as a band.
And have you guys performed at all? Because I know it's just recordings.
Yeah, we have as many albums as we have done live performances. I think we've played live together maybe 4 times, and that's not because we don't want to or anything, but it's just kind of a logistical thing. You know, Jake is a world-class musician with his own touring schedule, and it's almost all we can do is just to like lock him down for a week every year. Let alone trying to like organize a tour, you know, and he's got his own tour schedule with his own band, and also we're just like geographically in different parts of the world. So mostly the project is just like we're musicians who really like each other and want to make music together, and we're going to continue that into the future. But we really, you know, it's just not been a focus of ours to go out there and play live. We would love to. It's very hard to make happen.
Yeah. It's not, you're not the first musician I've talked to with the same story. It's pretty common, I think, actually.
Making an album is very fun, and it's an intense thing for like 5 or 6 days. And on a life level, it's very fulfilling to do these kind of projects. And I think it's more, from my perspective as a classical composer, that's really what we do, right? We make a piece of music and then we hand it out there into the world. Hopefully it's recorded for other people. And then we move on to the next piece. That's like a complete cycle for us. Whereas I think a lot of people, like I know Jake is like this. He'll write tunes for the next album, which he will then sell at the shows that he will play. Right. And so that's the motivation for a new album, is to have a product to take to your shows that you're going to do. But for me as a composer, I don't really have that aspect. So releasing an album into the world is kind of, that project is complete for me. So I know it's kind of different outlook and it's probably not very financially viable, but that's what it is.
Well, you are a composition professor at Oberlin Conservatory. I'm curious what kind of courses are you teaching? What's that like working with students?
Yeah, it's great. I teach topics courses in composition, like related to compositional techniques, especially in harmony. I teach a tonal counterpoint class, where basically we try to write fugues and inventions like Bach, because that's very relevant to any time a composer wants to use tonality, which is pretty common. And then I also teach a course based on my dissertation research, which is in microtonality. You'd never know it listening to like my mandolin concerto and Oklahoma Rooster and things like that, but I actually have a deep fascination with microtonality and alternate tunings. There's a piece of mine called Impromptu on Ezra's second album, which is a solo piece in 13 tones per octave, that an instrument that I built that has 13 tones per octave, and I wrote a piece from that instrument that's on the second album. Yeah, this piece called Impromptu, which is just, I said I wrote this piece after I had made this 13 tone instrument, right? So it's, instead of 12 tones per octave, there are 13. I always think of this as like the clown car, where there's like the car and there's like 12 clowns in there, and then there's a 13th one, and everyone just kind of has to get a little smaller, and that's what happens to all the half steps in there. They're just slightly smaller, but still sound beautiful and tonal. And so this piece Impromptu is just this three-minute little short piece that explores 13 tones per octave. So that might be a nice one to use. Yeah, this is from Earth to Ezra. So I teach a course here in that, and all the students will write pieces using some sort of microtonal tuning. We talk about temperaments going way back into the Renaissance and earlier. What else do I teach? Oh, and then just a whole host of private lessons.
Yeah, for composition.
Yeah.
Okay. I would. When we have to do microtonality in orchestra,
yeah.
which, I'm primarily an orchestra player, I don't like it because it's not accurate, because it gets more approximate, because we can't take the time to make sure everyone's quarter tone is exactly above the note. Also, I don't have perfect pitch, so it kind of drives me crazy.
It's hard.
But I do appreciate it in small ensembles, listening, and my ears have definitely opened up to that. And I listen to a lot of music from all over the world, so I'm very attuned to modes and different kinds of tuning. So that helps, I think. But I have to admit, I was aware of your second Ezra album, but I didn't listen to it as much because it didn't.
It's a harder one to listen to.
Yeah. It's a whole other thing, but it's fascinating. And actually, I was thinking, I'm always thinking of episodes to link for people, because I want to, I've been doing this for 5 years, and like, hey, the late great Mark Deutsch, he built this instrument, the Bazantar. He was based in San Francisco. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
I have, yeah.
So that whole episode is a deep dive into his microtonality and his instrument building, and he plays a lot. And actually, we recorded it a few months before he died.
Wow.
So, I'll link that, because he was quite something. Quite a musician.
Yeah, there are a few people out there who just really devote their lives to exploring that world. And I actually, not to get too mystical here, but I actually think that microtonality is a really great way, if done tastefully and done in doses that are sort of manageable, is that it can actually make an audience or someone listening to the music listen in a way that's different than it would be if it was just in equal temperament. Because it can create these sort of beautiful atmospheres, and you don't know what it is. There's no way to sort of analyze. And I think that takes you into this mode of listening that takes you out of yourself a bit. But it takes some really careful treatment by the composer. Like if a work gets too microtonal, then you just kind of get lost in this gray soup, I think. But there are certain ways of making it, I think, kind of a spiritual encounter, musical encounter, so that it can really just pierce your soul or something in a way that just other musics can't. Like, and that's the beauty of it, and that's really what I'm after. When I think of microtonality, it's not just a esoteric intellectual exercise, but just actually something that has a lot of beauty and meaning on a personal, spiritual level.
Did you have a musical memory when you were first exposed to it?
Yeah, yeah. When I was very young, I had an aunt who was a very good musician. Um, and when she realized that I had, as a kid, when I was a young kid, that I had musical leanings, she would basically fund a trip for me and my mom to go. For instance, I think I forget how old I was, but I went to go see Van Cliburn when he toured with the Moscow Philharmonic. Uh, they came to Salt Lake City, so my mom and I drove from New Mexico all the way up to Salt Lake City, and I got to see Van Cliburn, who, as a young pianist, was one of my heroes. But another trip, and I can't recall how old I was, but I went to Santa Fe, New Mexico. My aunt bought us tickets for this piano quintet, so string quartet plus piano, and they played a piece by Schumann, and then they played the piano quintet of Alfred Schnittke. Mm-hmm. And that was the very first piece I'd ever heard of contemporary music, period. And it's a microtonal piece, and I was just blown away by it. And I was too young to really know anything, and I went up to this person and I said, I really like Mr. Schneitke's music. Where can I find the score to it? And whoever that was asked my mom for our address and sent me a score.
Wow.
And a recording of Schnittke's piano quintet. And that was my first exposure to it. I was quite young.
That's interesting, Jesse, that you were saying you were in university or a teenager when you realized you were interested in composition, but that wasn't in your childhood, even though you had this interest in even looking at a score.
Yeah. I think I just, because my trajectory was such that I was going to be a concert pianist. I was very focused on that. And I did dabble in composition as a teenager, but it all sounded like Rachmaninoff because that's what I was playing, right? And
yeah.
So I realized that, well, okay, I don't really have the chops to write anything that's not Rachmaninoff, and it's not as good as Rachmaninoff anyway. So I just kept practicing rep and preparing for competitions and things like that. But it took me breaking my arm, I think, to know that I wasn't going to be a concert pianist. And then discovering this other thing, and that led me, I don't know, it's just by luck really that I became a composer. It wasn't really on my radar too much.
Yeah, it's interesting because you became a composer, multi-instrumentalist, luthier, improviser. I'm guessing you're maybe happier now than you would have been had you been successful following your original dream.
I think about that all the time. And I think, yes, definitely. Yeah. That's, looking back, I realized that I probably was only doing it for, like, not the healthiest of reasons. I grew up in a very sort of rural place where I was definitely the best musician around. And, I was very serious about it, but there's just a lot of ways to, like, treat that in the wrong way, right? So I was actually kind of cocky with my skill. I mean, I was the guy at these piano competitions that would just go rattle off a Chopin etude backstage just to, like, mess in the heads of the other contestants, But it took breaking my arm actually to realize that I was actually immensely unhappy as in that world, because I never had any nerves or anything up until I broke my arm, and I kind of realized that I was mortal or something. I'm sure this sounds so strange, but all of a sudden then after I was out of a cast and I was playing again, I would have the most debilitating stage fright. And it was just like me breaking my arm that made that happen. And of course, like it felt different to play. There was pain involved with some of the bigger octave passages, etc. But yeah, I don't know. Like I realized that there was so much more to music than just winning a competition or being like the big fish in my town. Um, and so when I left New Mexico, I went to a different region, and then I had this stage fright, and I started to become more of a human, I would say, and realize sort of what music was about. And it's about the expression, be that virtuosic expression or emotional expression. Um, and yeah, it just breaking my arm and making that turnover is really was the crucial turning point in my musical life.
And for your undergrad, you went to Oregon.
Hmm.
And I was interested to read, like, you had some success. You had a string band, you were on NPR, like, that's quite young.
Wow, you've dived way back there. Yeah, I had a successful band named String Helix, which again was just me and my me and some friends that were writing tunes together, and I would sing, and there were just tunes that I wrote in my living room. Again, and that was probably the most performing I've ever done. We made a run of 1,000 CDs, and we sold them all. This is back when people like bought CDs. Um, we were on this televised thing, and a national, whatever the national television, what's that called? PBS, I think it was
Mhm.
called. We had this like Oregon wide televised thing. We played Garrison Keillor. We came to Bend, Oregon. That was for like a listening audience of 10 million people. I remember playing a show once, and we did this one tune, and the whole audience like stood up and started singing with us. Like they knew our album well enough to where they were actually singing the lyrics with me as I was singing them, and that was pretty special. Um, but then I just decided I also had a family, and I knew that I had to make money somehow, so I decided to go to grad school, and that's when I kind of left that world and went into the classical music vein full time.
Hmm. So, unlike your parents, you had kids young.
Yeah, well, my parents had kids young too. I just happened to be the very youngest of
Oh,
them
okay.
all. Yeah, so I actually have 9 siblings,
Oh, okay.
um, but the closest one was 13 when I was born. So my mom was 47 when I was born.
Hmm.
So I kind of was raised as an only child because all my siblings were out of the house, but I do have those 9 siblings.
Okay. Are any of them musicians, like professionally?
Professionally, no. I have a couple very good musicians in my family, um, and actually that's one of the things that drew me to uh, just folk music in general is that me and my sisters would sing harmony together
Okay.
growing up, and my mom too. My mom was a really good musician, could play the piano, and my sisters were all really really good musicians, although they would never believe that if you told them that. But they actually have tons of skill, great voices. My sister's a good guitar player. Um, yeah, and going back, my aunt, that funded everything.
Hmm.
She was actually a concert pianist, like in her area, not of any like world renown or anything, but she would concertize sort of in the I don't know the West Coast area. And going back, even I have some people on my mom's side who were in the early sort of Metropolitan Opera. So there is music in my mom's line.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to have received a modicum of that.
I was curious because you've written a lot of vocal music and chamber operas as well.
Hmm. I love writing for the voice, and again, I've been lucky to meet some just astoundingly good musicians. Soprano Sharon Harms specifically, who has really championed so many of my works, and I've written for her. And again, just a person who can take my work and turn it into something beyond what I had envisioned. Um, there's something about writing for voice, though, because it's just an immediate type of expression that everyone hopefully will be able to understand the words. So there's the power of the words, and then it's done with this human voice, and then you can just it just kind of takes care of the form for you. You just let the music follow whatever the words are evocative of. I love it.
Yeah. And you haven't maybe this is past tense, but are you writing a symphony now?
So I'm writing my first symphony for the Mahlerfest Orchestra, Colorado Mahlerfest. It's in Boulder every year, and they've been meeting every summer for decades, I think, and just they do a Mahler symphony every year plus other programming. And next year they are doing Mahler 8, and they've commissioned me to write a piece for that orchestra minus all the singers, which I don't know if you're aware, but that's a huge orchestra. I think there are 8 horns in it. It's just it's a colossal orchestra. I will play the mandolin part in the orchestra, and then I'm writing a symphony that for those players, and I'll play the mandolin part in my own symphony, which will be fun. And I'm really hoping to have a worthy mandolin that I make for that performance.
Fantastic. But it'll be mic'd, or
I would think so. It usually is. Yeah, I did it with the Boston Symphony more than a decade ago now, and I was mic'd.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'm curious, do you have a violist in your life? Because you've written so much viola music.
I do. Yeah, I have a very special viola player in my life. It's my daughter. My youngest daughter, Lindsay, plays the viola, and she's very, very good. I'm very proud of her. She just got into Oberlin as a viola major, so yeah, we'll see where she goes. I'm currently building her an instrument as well.
Wow.
Which I'm excited to do.
Do you experiment with varnish at all?
I feel like varnish is one big experiment.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It's like there are different types of varnish, and I'm not yet completely comfortable with them.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to ask you, Jesse, going back to your early life, you got this prize to live in Italy for a year, composition prize. So do you want to reflect on that experience a bit?
Yes. That was right out of grad school. So I just finished up at Cornell with my doctorate. And I got the Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome. And it's this amazing, idyllic situation where you get to go to Rome for a year. They house you. They give you a studio. And you're not to do any work or anything related to, like making money. And they pay you a stipend. And there's a world-class chef there that makes you 3 meals a day.
Wow.
I got to go there with my whole family. They put us up in an apartment. My kids went to Italian school for a year. we got there in like August maybe, and by October they were just like speaking fluently. Like Italian kids, we'd call our kids on the phone and they'd just be yapping in Italian. It was awesome. It's one of the best years of my life. I just went up to this studio. It's called Casa Rustica. And it's this famed old place that was just used to be a roadhouse on the outskirts of town, but it's right by the Aurelian Wall. And it's just gorgeous there. All the people we were with were just incredible. Something about Italian culture is that any old man on the street will talk to you until the wee hours of the morning, even if, your Italian's bad and their English is bad. There's just this openness in the culture there, at least when I was there, that I'll just never forget. And of course, it was just like a 20-minute walk down to like the Vatican and Trastevere, and I'll never forget that time. It was beautiful.
Did you have commissions, or like what was that like in terms of your creative life?
Yeah, I had several commissions. I wrote a piece for the Sharon Ensemble when I was there, which is players from the Berlin Philharmonic, which was premiered there. And then I went up to Berlin. So I wrote that and finished it and premiered it while there. I wrote an orchestra piece, which is quite special to me because where I was, where the academy is located on this hill in Rome, which is kind of the tallest hill in Rome. It's right by the Dora Pamphili, the big park there. And supposedly, like 400 years ago, it's the hill that Galileo went up to with his invention, the telescope, to first look at the night sky.
Wow.
And he said when he first looked through the telescope, sort of up at the cosmos, he says that like the heavens were arranged in innumerable stars, scattered in clusters, was how he wrote it. And every morning, I don't know if it was like drinking wine late at night or something, but I would wake up at like 3:30 every morning, and I would go up to my studio. And I realized that, the city was asleep. It's not like a modern city where there's lights everywhere and you can't see the sky. Like at the night, you can see the night sky. And it was just always so clear, and the stars. And I realized that I was here sharing 400 years later the same experience that Galileo had. And so I'd walk through the gardens up to my studio and look up at the sky and think about Galileo. And so I'd go there and I'd compose this orchestra piece, and I called it Innumerable Stars Scattered in Clusters. And it's kind of this trajectory through space musically. So it's just stuff like that. I don't feel like usually in life there's a ton of those moments where you feel such a connection to history. But in Rome, it was definitely like just around every single corner. Anywhere you'd go, you realize that you're a part of this long human trajectory. So it did give me a lot of perspective.
That's beautiful. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap this up, but I always want to ask if there's things we didn't get to that you want to talk about.
No, I don't think so. Thanks for like the long form interview. It's nice.
Yeah, that's what I like too. So thanks so much, Jesse.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Keep in mind, I've also linked directly several episodes you'll find interesting in the show notes of this one. Please do share this with your friends and check out episodes you may have missed at leahroseman.com. If you could buy me a coffee to support this series, that would be wonderful. I'm an independent podcaster, and I really do need the help of my listeners. All the links are in the show notes. The podcast theme music was written by Nick Cold. Have a wonderful week.